My name is Alice Manning. I am 29 years old, and on Christmas night, I walked into my childhood home already bracing myself for the comments I knew were coming. The tree sparkled in the corner. The table was set with china, my mother only used for show, and still I felt like a guest instead of family. My father's eyes lingered on my hands, stained with the grease I could never fully scrub away, and then his voice cut through the holiday cheer, telling everyone that no man would want a woman with oil under her nails. Laughter followed, my sister wrinkling her nose like she could smell the garage clinging to me, and in that moment every memory of being mocked and overlooked came flooding back. I sat there with my heart pounding, a secret burning on the tip of my tongue, knowing that what I said next could break everything they thought they knew about me. Have you ever been pushed so far that the truth you were hiding became the only weapon left? Because that night I chose to use it, and nothing in that house was ever the same again. The sound of crystal shattering against polished hardwood cut through the laughter at my father's Christmas table, and for a split second no one moved. The family portrait that had slipped from his hand lay broken on the floor, the glass splitting my face in two. I stared at it, my chest burning with humiliation, while the scent of roasted ham and cinnamon candles turned sharp and heavy in the back of my throat. The room froze around me. Forks hovered in midair, wine glasses trembled slightly in surprised hands. Even the children looked up from their screens. My father's smirk faded as he bent to pick up the shards, but the damage was already done. My reflection fractured across the floor, mirrored the crack inside me that had been widening for years. I could feel the weight of every stare pressing down, waiting for me to shrink the way I always had. My sister leaned back, her eyes sparkling with cruel amusement. Tom swirled his wine like this was nothing more than dinner theater. James looked away, but his silence was as sharp as words. The insult still burned in my chest, but it was the silence afterward that cut deepest. For years I had learned to survive that silence, the unspoken agreement that I was less than, that my life was a disappointment best laughed at and then ignored. But staring at that shattered frame, I felt something inside me shift. My palms were damp, my pulse so loud I thought the whole table could hear it. I reached for my glass, lifted it with deliberate calm, and let the cool water steady me. My voice came out softer than I expected, but it carried through the room like a spark. Actually, I have been married for 6 months. None of you were invited. The sound of forks dropping onto porcelain was louder than the carol music, humming in the background. My mother's eyes widened, her pearls trembling against her collarbone as her breath caught. Victoria let out a disbelieving laugh, high and sharp, like glass scratching glass. James finally spoke, his voice low, almost accusing. "Married. You. That is impossible." I leaned back, let the weight of their shock wash over me. For once they were the ones silenced, not me. I let the pause linger, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. The garland above the mantel twinkled with tiny white lights, but the room felt dim heavy. My father slammed his fist on the table, rattling the plates, the cranberry sauce nearly tipping. "Enough of this, Alice. Do not make up stories to embarrass us. You think that is funny. You think lying makes you look better." My heart thudded hard, but I did not look away. I thought of Daniel's hand on mine, the simple silver band glinting in the summer sun when we stood together on Whidbey Island. I thought of the salt in the air, the sound of waves, the promise of a life built on something real. That memory steadied me more than any courage I thought I had. "It is not a lie," I said, my voice quiet but sharp. 6 months. June 24th. A small wedding. 30 people who actually care about me. Victoria's laughter died on her lips. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Tom muttered something under his breath about attention-seeking. My father's face flushed red, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. The Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, ornaments reflecting fragments of all our faces. For a moment, the silence felt like another kind of carol, a song of disbelief and betrayal hanging in the air. I bent down and picked up the cracked frame, set it upright on the buffet, even though the glass had already ruined the picture. The smile I had forced for that portrait 10 years ago was now split through, the middle just like the family sitting in front of me. I could hear my father breathing heavily, the sound of his frustration filling the room. He pointed a finger at me, his voice rising. "Who is he? Who would marry you without our blessing?" I held his gaze, let him see I was not the child he could silence anymore. "That is not the question you should be asking." The words hung there, the weight of them pressing against every wall in that glittering dining room. For once it was not me who was small, it was them. All of them staring, waiting, their plates still steaming but untouched, their mouths frozen open. And in that pause I felt something shift. The first crack in the wall they had built around me my whole life. The first moment I realized I was no longer theirs to mock or to control. The fire popped in the hearth sparks leaping, and outside the snow kept falling silent and steady, covering everything in white. Inside, though, the air was heavy, thick with the truth I had just dropped onto the table, and I knew this Christmas would not end like the others. I sat back in my chair, folded my hands, and waited for what would come next. My father leaned forward, his knuckles pressing into the table as if he could crush the wood itself. His eyes were sharp, the way they had been when I was a child caught sneaking cookies from the pantry. He spoke low, but every word cut through the room. If you think a stunt like this makes you look strong, you are wrong. All it does is remind everyone why you have always been a disappointment. My chest tightened, but I kept my face still. My mother shifted uncomfortably beside him, her manicured fingers smoothing the tablecloth that did not need smoothing. She avoided my eyes, pretending to study the candles that dripped wax onto polished silver holders. Victoria raised her wine glass and smirked. "You hear that, Alice? You can never fool Dad. Honestly, who would put up with you long enough to marry you?" Her laugh was brittle, the kind that made my teeth ache. My brother James finally spoke, his voice mild as if he wanted to keep the peace, though his words only fueled the fire. "If it is true, then why hide it? Families do not keep secrets like that unless they have something to be ashamed of." The word ashamed stung more than I wanted to admit. Shame had been the currency of this house for as long as I could remember. I pushed my chair back slightly, the sound of the legs scraping across the hardwood making everyone glance up. My father raised his hand. "Sit. You are not walking out of this house until you explain yourself." I stayed seated, though every nerve in me screamed to get out of that room. I wanted to breathe air that was not thick with judgment and turkey gravy. Then he did something that chilled me more than his words. He pulled a folder from the sideboard drawer, the one he always kept locked, and slid it across the table toward me. Papers spilled out, legal documents with crisp letterheads. I recognized the name printed at the top. Manning's Auto, the garage my grandfather had built with his hands 60 years ago. My father's mouth curved in something between a smile and a sneer. "I was going to wait until New Year's, but since you want to play games tonight, let me enlighten you. I have a buyer lined up for the garage. The papers are drawn. By spring it will be gone, and you will not waste another day of your life rolling under cars like some grease monkey." The words slammed into me harder than any insult. My stomach lurched. That garage was the only piece of my grandfather left in this world, the place where I had spent summers learning how engines breathed and how steel carried memory. It was more than concrete and tools. It was mine. My voice broke before I steadied it. "You cannot sell it." My father chuckled, a low sound that made my skin prickle. "Of course I can. It is under my name and you have no say. You should be thanking me. Maybe then you will finally be free of that filthy place." My mother finally looked at me, her eyes cool but not unkind, as if she wanted me to just agree and end the fight. "Your father is right, Alice. That garage is a burden. You could do better things with your time if you let it go." I wanted to scream. Better things? Like what? Like sitting at charity luncheons where no one knew my name. Like living in the shadow of Victoria's tailored suits and James's promotions. My better was under that roof of grease and grit where I actually mattered. I looked at Victoria, who was swirling her wine like she owned the air in the room. "Of course," she chimed in. "It is for your own good. Imagine Alice finally being free. You could maybe go back to school, do something respectable." Respectable. That word had chased me since I was 16, when I told them I wanted to stay at the garage after high school, when I chose wrenches over textbooks. Respectable was their excuse for every time they wanted me to be someone I was not. James spoke again, leaning forward now, his voice softer but still dripping with that calm superiority. "Dad has investors who are counting on this. You cannot stand in the way." I laughed short and sharp, though nothing about it was funny. The sound startled even me. "You all think you can decide my life like it is a chessboard. You think the garage is just another piece to move around. But it is not your piece to move." My father slammed his palm against the table. "Enough. You will sign these papers, Alice, tomorrow morning. I will not have this conversation again." My mother's hand touched his wrist, a silent plea for calm, but he shook her off. His eyes bored into me, daring me to defy him. I sat there with my heart racing, my mind already running ahead. I knew something they did not know, something he had hidden but had not hidden well enough. The memory of that locked drawer in the garage office, the one I had jimmied open years ago, flashed in my mind. I remembered seeing the edges of a document with my name on it before he snatched it away. That night, sitting at the Christmas table with their laughter and their judgment, I realized the fight had shifted. They thought they held the power, but I had a thread to pull, and once I did, the whole fabric of his plan would unravel. I picked up the scattered papers and slid them back into the folder, my hands steady even as my pulse raced. I met my father's eyes, held them until he looked away first. "Not tonight," I said quietly. "You will get no signature from me tonight." The room fell into silence again, the kind that rang in my ears. The Christmas tree lights blinked steady and innocent, as if none of this was happening. Outside, snow pressed against the windows, muting the world beyond. Victoria set her glass down harder than necessary. "Always so dramatic, Alice. Always making everything about you." I did not answer. My father's glare followed me as I pushed my chair back and stood. My legs shook, but my steps were steady as I walked toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard my mother sigh, long and weary, like I was the cause of every disappointment in her life. I paused at the broken frame still sitting crooked on the buffet. The cracked glass caught the tree lights, scattering fragments across the wall. I lifted it, traced the split down the center of my smile, and then set it back. Their voices rose behind me, arguing now among themselves, but I no longer listened. My mind was already miles away, back in the garage, back in the smell of oil and rubber and my grandfather's cologne lingering in the old office. I knew what I had to do. The fight was no longer just about their insults or their mockery. It was about the only thing that had ever truly been mine, and I was not about to let them take it away. I walked out of the dining room, past the glittering tree and the piles of wrapped gifts, past the warmth of the fire. The cold draft of the front hallway met me sharp and bracing, a reminder that outside was a world where their rules did not apply. I slipped on my coat, my fingers trembling as I buttoned it, and when I reached the door, I looked back once more. My father's shadow filled the doorway to the dining room, his figure tall and unmoving. His voice followed me, low and final. "If you walk out now, Alice, you are no daughter of mine." The words should have gutted me. Instead, they lit something fierce inside. I opened the door, let the winter air flood in, and stepped into the night. The snow crunched under my boots. And with each step away from that house, I felt the weight of their control, loosen though not disappear. I knew they would not let this go. My father never let anything go. But I also knew he had underestimated me just as he always had, and that was the first mistake that would cost him everything. The wind bit at my face as I walked down the driveway, the crunch of snow beneath my boots loud in the silence of the neighborhood. The glow of Christmas lights blinked from every porch, cheerful against the night, but they only reminded me how different my family's house felt inside. I pulled my coat tighter and let the cold clear my head. By the time I slid into my truck, my hands had stopped shaking. I sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, breathing in the faint smell of engine oil and pine from the tree-shaped air freshener hanging on the mirror. This truck had carried me through more fights with them than I could count. Tonight, it would carry me toward the truth I had been avoiding for years. I drove straight to the garage in Tacoma. The streets were nearly empty, just a few plows clearing the roads and the glow of gas stations open late. My headlights washed over the front of the building, the peeling blue paint of the sign that still read Manning's Auto. My grandfather's name, my name. I killed the engine and sat in the cold cab. Memories rose up uninvited and sharp, summers with grease smeared on my cheeks. My grandfather's voice, patient, as he explained how carburetors worked. The smell of his coffee thermos, always too strong, mixed with the oil and metal. The way he would clap a hand on my shoulder and say I had steady hands, hands that knew how to fix things. When he died at 2015, I thought that garage would be mine. But at the funeral, my father had stepped forward, voice thick with authority, and declared he would manage it until further notice. I had been 20 years old, too stunned to argue. Later that year, when I asked to see the will, he told me there were no documents that named me, that the garage was his by default. But I remembered one night the year after the funeral, when I stayed late to clean. I had found his office door ajar, the drawer of his desk slightly open. A corner of a document stuck out my name clear in bold letters. Before I could pull it free, my father stormed in and snatched it away. He told me I was snooping, that I had no right to go through his things. I had let it go buried under years of his intimidation. Until tonight. I unlocked the side door with the key I had kept on my chain, the same key my grandfather had given me when I was 16. The smell hit me instantly, old oil and dust, the faint tang of rust. It was dark and freezing inside, but I knew my way by memory. I walked past the lifts, past the shelves of parts and tools, into the small office at the back. The desk was the same heavy oak piece that had always been there, carved with scratches and dents from decades of use. I flicked on the lamp and began pulling open drawers. Paperwork spilled out, receipts, old invoices, catalogs. I rifled through them, my fingers numb from the cold, my pulse hammering. In the bottom drawer beneath stacks of faded manuals, I found it. A manila envelope thicker than the rest, My name is handwritten across the front in my grandfather's sharp, deliberate script. I froze my breath, catching, and then I tore it open. Inside was a copy of the will, dated July 2nd, 2015. It stated in clear legal language that Manning's auto, the land and the building were to be left to me, his granddaughter Alice Manning, in full. My hands trembled as I traced the words, the black ink proof of everything my father had tried to deny. For years he had lied, holding onto the garage as if it were his. For years he had convinced everyone, even me, that I was powerless. And here was the truth, folded and yellowed but undeniable. I sank into the chair, the weight of the discovery pressing into me. A mix of triumph and fury surged through my veins. My grandfather had believed in me enough to leave me his life's work, and my father had stolen that belief, tried to erase it. The office door creaked and I nearly jumped out of my skin. But it was only Emily, my best friend since high school. She had a knack for showing up when I needed her most. She wore her scrub's hair tied back, the smell of antiseptic clinging to her. "Alice," she said softly, "what are you doing here this late?" I held up the will, my voice breaking. "He left it to me, Em. He left it to me all along." She stepped closer, eyes widening as she read the document. Her hand went to her mouth, then to my shoulder. So he lied. All these years he lied. I nodded, tears blurring the ink. He told me there was nothing, that I had no claim. Emily's jaw tightened, and for a moment she looked fiercer than I had ever seen her. "Then this changes everything. You have proof. He cannot take it away from you now." I let out a shaky laugh. "He will try. You know he will." She squeezed my shoulder. "Then you fight him. You fight with everything you have." Her words struck deep. I looked around the office at the photos of my grandfather with his first car, at the clock that still ticked on the wall, at the empty coffee mug he had used every day. This was not just property. It was a legacy, one he had trusted me to carry. I folded the will carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it inside my coat. The paper felt heavy against my chest, heavier than any insult my father had thrown at me. Emily glanced at the window where snowflakes drifted down. "You need to be careful, Alice. If your father finds out you have this, he will not sit quietly." I met her gaze. "I know. That is why he can never see it coming." We locked up the garage and stepped out into the night. The cold hit us full force, but inside me something burned bright, steadier than it had in years. I climbed back into my truck, the envelope safe under my coat. For the first time since walking out of that house, I felt taller, like I was finally standing in the place my grandfather had seen for me. The fight was just beginning, but I was not walking into it empty-handed anymore. And as the snow fell harder, covering the streets in white, I knew my father's grip on me had already started to crack. By the time I pulled into our apartment complex, my eyes burned from the strain of headlights bouncing off the snow. The building stood modest and worn, with its chipped bricks and flickering porch lights, but to me it felt like a sanctuary. I parked crooked, too tired to straighten out, and carried the envelope under my coat like it was my heartbeat. When I opened the door, Biscuit came barreling toward me, his paws slipping on the hardwood, his tail a blur. Daniel was right behind him, wiping his hands on a rag, his hair still mussed from hours bent over engines at EVTech. He froze when he saw my face. "Alice, what happened?" I shut the door against the cold and pressed my back to it, finally letting the weight of the evening collapse on me. I held out the envelope with trembling fingers. He left it to me. My grandfather left the garage to me. All this time, my father lied. Daniel took the envelope gently, his eyes scanning the document with careful precision. His brows knit together, then rose in quiet astonishment. "This changes everything," he whispered. I nodded, tears threatening. "He has been trying to sell it, Daniel. He already has a buyer lined up." Daniel set the papers down and cupped my face, his hands warm and rough from work. "Then we fight. We fight smart." I collapsed against him, breathing in the smell of soap and motor oil, that familiar scent that felt like home. Biscuit whined and nudged at my leg until I bent to scratch behind his ears. For a moment, the world outside seemed far away. We sat on the couch, the document spread between us. Daniel traced the lines with his finger, his voice steady. "The will is clear. This garage is yours. The law will back you up. And since we are married, I have a legal stake too. That makes us stronger." I stared at the silver band on his finger, the one that matched mine tucked under my work gloves most days. The memory of that day on Whidbey Island came rushing back. The salty breeze off the water, the laughter of our closest friends, the way the sun dipped low and lit up his eyes as he said his vows. 30 people had stood with us in that moment, a family made of choice and love, not blood and control. I remembered slipping into the simple white dress Linda had sewn by hand, every stitch carrying her warmth. Henry had walked me down the makeshift aisle of driftwood and wildflowers, his eyes shining like he truly believed I was his daughter already. Daniel's sister had read a poem she wrote herself, her voice breaking halfway through. It had been imperfect messy, the sound of waves nearly drowning us out, but it had been real. I blinked back to the present and smiled through the ache in my chest. They would never understand Daniel. They would have ruined it if I had invited them. Daniel leaned closer, pressing his forehead to mine. That is why we did it our way. No one gets to tell us what our love should look like. The words wrapped around me like armor. Still, the thought of the coming fight made my stomach twist. My father had money influence and lawyers who could bury me in paperwork. But for the first time, I had more than just stubbornness. I had proof. I had a partner. Daniel stood and began pacing, running a hand through his hair. We need to get this filed properly. Make sure it is recorded, notarized. Once it is official, he cannot touch it. I nodded, wiping my eyes. We will go after the holidays. He sat back down, taking my hand in his. And Alice, this is not just about protecting the past. Think of what we can build. EV-Tech is looking for expansion sites. If we merge what I am doing with what your grandfather gave you, that garage could become something new. A bridge between tradition and the future. The idea lit a spark in me. My grandfather's space, where old trucks had once rumbled, was reborn into a station for electric vehicles, clean and alive with possibility. I could see the bays filled with a new kind of work, the laughter of apprentices learning just like I had once learned, but then the darker image crept in. My father's face at the table, red with rage, his hand slamming against the wood. His voice promised I would not walk away from his daughter. Daniel must have seen the fear in my eyes. He squeezed my hand firm and grounding. Let him roar. Let him threaten. At the end of the day, Alice, he cannot erase what is written, and he cannot erase us. We sat in silence for a while. The only sounds were the hum of the heater and Biscuit's soft snores curled at our feet. The weight of the envelope pressed against the coffee table, its presence impossible to ignore. Finally, I whispered, I am scared, Daniel. He pulled me against him, his arm strong around my shoulders. Being scared does not mean you are weak. It means you know what is at stake. And I will be with you every step of the way. The words sank deep, soothing the raw edges inside me. I closed my eyes and let myself believe them. For the first time in years, I was not facing the storm alone. Later, when we finally went to bed, I tucked the envelope into the top drawer of my nightstand, sliding it under my journal. I rested my hand on the wood, a silent promise to my grandfather. I would not let them take it from me again. Daniel fell asleep quickly, his breaths even, his hands still wrapped around mine. I lay awake longer, listening to the distant sound of snowplows scraping the streets, thinking of the war that was coming. But beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion was something else, a flicker of strength I had not felt in years, a certainty that this time I had more than just my voice. I had the truth. But the truth did not stay hidden for long. It never did in my family. By the time New Year's Eve passed, the phone calls began. First my mother, her voice brittle with the sharpness of champagne glasses clinking in the background. Alice, your father is serious. He wants this done before spring. He says you are being unreasonable. I listened, staring out the frosted window of our apartment at the snow piled against the curb. I let her words tumble over me like cold water. For once I did not argue. I only said I am not signing anything. Her sharp inhale told me she had not expected that. Then she lowered her voice as if afraid someone might overhear. Do not ruin this family, Alice. Do not embarrass us more than you already have. And then the line went dead. I did not hear from them again until mid-January, when the invitation came, or maybe I should call it a summons. A glossy white card arrived in the mail with embossed lettering, Family Dinner, Sunday 6 o'clock at the Manning residence. Attendance required. Daniel frowned as I held it up to him. Looks like a court order disguised as a roast beef dinner, he muttered. I folded the card and slipped it into my pocket. Let them think they can corner me again. This time I will not walk defenseless. When Sunday came, we drove through icy streets to the big house I had once called home. My stomach twisted as we pulled up, the familiar sight of the manicured lawn blanketed in snow. Daniel parked and took my hand before I could step out. Remember, he said firmly, we are in this together. Inside, the dining room looked like a stage set. The table gleamed with china and silver candles flickered in crystal holders, and a roast steamed at the center, filling the air with heavy richness. But the real weight was the stack of documents laid neatly beside my father's plate. He did not wait for pleasantries. He pushed the papers toward me, his jaw tight. Sign these, Alice, tonight. Let us end this foolishness before it goes any further. My throat was dry, but my voice was clear. No. The word cracked like ice. My mother gasped. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her wine glass poised like a weapon. She smirked, her voice cutting through the tension. Still stubborn. You always did like to drag drama into every room. Tom, her husband, cleared his throat. Victoria maybe let her explain. But Victoria's eyes glittered as she leaned forward. What is there to explain? She is clinging to a garage full of rust and junk. Do you really think you can run it, Alice? That place will collapse under your mismanagement. I felt Daniel tense beside me, his hand tightening around mine. I steadied my breath and reached into my purse. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out the folded document. My father's eyes followed my movements, narrowing when he saw the envelope. This is what you forgot to mention, I said, laying the will flat on the table. My grandfather left the garage to me. In writing. Legally binding. You have no right to sell it. The room erupted. My mother's hand flew to her pearls, her voice trembling with indignation. Where did you get that? From where it was meant to be, I answered. In his desk. My father's face turned crimson. He reached across the table, but Daniel slid the papers closer to me before he could snatch them. Daniel's voice was steady calm in the storm. We have already consulted with an attorney. This document is valid. The garage belongs to Alice. Victoria laughed, the sound sharp as shattered glass. Even if it is valid, do you really think a judge will let you keep it? Look at you, Alice. You crawl under cars for a living. You think that makes you competent to manage property? Her words sliced, but I met her gaze without flinching. Better to crawl under cars with honest hands than crawl into someone else's pocket for respect. The silence that followed was thick. My brother James finally spoke, his voice quieter but laced with disapproval. Alice, you are tearing this family apart. I turned to him, my heart pounding, but my words steady. No. Dad tore it apart when he lied about the will. You tore it apart every time you bet on whether I would end up alone. This family was broken long before I said a word. My father slammed his fist against the table, rattling the silverware. Enough! You think you are clever waving that paper around. But I will fight you in court. I will bury you in motions and fees until you beg to give up. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locked on my father. And we will fight back. Alice is not alone anymore. My father's glare flicked between us, his teeth gritted. His voice dropped low, almost a growl. You are making a mistake you cannot undo. I reached for the will, folding it carefully and slipping it back into my purse. My pulse was racing, but my spine felt straighter than it ever had at that table. I met his eyes. The mistake was thinking I would stay silent forever. The air in the room grew heavier. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, whispering prayers under her breath. Victoria scoffed and poured herself another glass. James stared at his plate, saying nothing more. Finally, my father sat back his chair, groaning under the weight of his anger. He pointed a finger at me, steady and sharp. Then I will see you in court. The words hung in the air like smoke. I rose from my seat, Daniel standing with me. My knees trembled, but my voice did not. Then I guess I will see you there. We left the table without another word, the sound of our footsteps echoing down the marble hall. I did not look back, though I could feel their eyes burning holes in my back. Outside the night was cold and still. The snow crunched under our boots as we walked to the truck. Daniel opened the door for me, his touch grounding. As we pulled away from the house, I caught one last glimpse of the glowing windows, the silhouettes moving inside like figures trapped in a painting. For the first time, I did not feel like one of them anymore. The fight was no longer looming. It had begun. By mid-January, I was sitting in the lobby of Pierce County Courthouse, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The building smelled of disinfectant and wet coats, a mixture of nerves and winter. Daniel sat beside me, tapping his boot softly against the floor. His brow furrowed as he read through a folder of notes we had gathered. When the clerk called my name, I felt the air leave my lungs. We followed the sound into the courtroom, where the wooden benches and stern portraits of judges seemed designed to remind people of their place. My father was already seated at the table across the aisle, his suit pressed sharp enough to cut his lawyer whispering in his ear. The man looked slick, his silver tie gleaming, his leather briefcase perched like a weapon. My mother sat behind them, her pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Victoria was there too, perched in the second row like she was about to argue a case herself. Tom leaned back with his arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. James sat at the far end, his eyes glued to his phone as if he wanted to disappear into it. I swallowed hard and took my seat. My lawyer, a woman named Carla, with a steady gaze and a voice like steel, leaned close to me. Remember, Alice, the will is clear. He can huff and puff, but the paper speaks for itself. The judge entered and the room rose. My knees wobbled, but I forced myself to stand tall. When we were seated again, the gavel struck, and my father's lawyer launched into his argument. He painted me as unqualified, irresponsible, incapable of managing property. He called me reckless and said my life choices proved I lacked judgment. He even waved his hands toward my grease-stained work boots, like they were evidence of my incompetence. Every insult landed like a slap, but I clenched my fists and held my head high. My father's eyes flicked toward me with triumph, as if he expected me to break down. Then Carla rose. Her voice was calm, precise. She laid the will on the table, sliding it forward for the judge to see. She explained its validity, the dates, the signatures. She reminded the court that my grandfather had been of sound mind, that he had chosen me for a reason. She pointed out that my father had hidden the document, that he had attempted to sell property he had no legal right to sell. The judge nodded, taking notes. My father's lawyer objected, trying to twist the words, but Carla cut through him like a blade. Then, as if the moment were scripted for maximum cruelty, Victoria rose from the bench behind my father. She asked to speak. The judge allowed it, and Victoria walked to the stand, her heels clicking against the floor. She adjusted her blazer and smiled, a polished performance I had seen at countless family dinners. She spoke about how I had kept my marriage a secret, how I had hidden it from everyone. She said it showed a pattern of deception, a lack of transparency. She suggested that if I could keep something as big as marriage hidden, I could not be trusted to manage a business. My stomach knotted. I wanted to leap up and scream that my wedding had been my choice, my joy, my safe place. But before I could, Carla stood. She calmly reminded the court that secrecy in personal life does not negate legal rights, that a marriage hidden from toxic family dynamics is not deception, but survival, that my private choices had nothing to do with the validity of a will. The judge agreed, brushing aside Victoria's theatrics with a wave of his hand. I glanced back at my sister, saw the fury burning in her eyes, and something inside me steadied. She had tried to strip me bare in front of strangers, but I was still standing. During a recess, Daniel squeezed my hand. "You are holding your own," he said softly. I shook my head, my voice low. "I feel like I am drowning." He leaned closer. "Then let me be the lifeboat." We returned to our seats, the day dragging on with motions and objections, each side trying to twist the law into their favor. My father's lawyer demanded evaluations of my financial history, questioning whether I had the means to sustain the property. Carla countered that my financial records showed consistency and growth, that I had managed my small shop with no debts. When the judge finally adjourned, his words were measured. The case was not resolved, but he acknowledged the will was legitimate. A further hearing would be scheduled, evidence reviewed in full. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp and cold. I leaned against the stone steps, my breath rising in visible clouds. My father brushed past me without a word, his lawyer at his side. My mother glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable. Before following him, Victoria stopped long enough to smirk. "Enjoy your little victory, Alice. It will not last." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "We will see." She turned sharply and walked away, her heels striking against the pavement. Daniel wrapped his arm around me, his warmth cutting through the chill. "We are not done," he said, "but we are not losing either." I knotted my fingers, brushing against the envelope in my bag, the weight of my grandfather's will grounding me. I looked up at the courthouse, its columns towering against the gray winter sky. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. For the first time, I saw cracks in my father's armor. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the courtroom, my sister's smirk, my father's fists clenched around papers that were never his to claim. By dawn, I gave up on rest and made coffee strong enough to sting. Daniel was already up, lacing his boots, his face pale in the kitchen light. "I have to head in early," he said, pulling on his jacket. "One of the prototypes failed testing last night. They need me at EVTech." I nodded, sliding the mug toward him. "Be careful." He kissed my forehead, his lips warm against my skin, and then he was gone. The apartment felt empty, just me and Biscuit pacing the hall, his nails clicking against the floor like a restless metronome. I tried to focus on work, but my hands shook too much to hold a wrench steady. By noon, I drove to Henry and Linda's house. Their small home sat on a quiet street lined with bare maple trees, the kind of place where neighbors still waved from porches. Linda opened the door with a smile, flour dusting her sweater, the smell of bread drifting out. "Come in, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You look tired." Inside, Henry sat at the table with a crossword puzzle and a steaming mug. He looked up, his kind eyes softening. "Hard day." I sank into the chair opposite him. "Hard month." Linda set a plate of warm rolls in front of me. "Eat," she said. "Everything feels worse on an empty stomach." As I tore the bread apart, the words tumbled out. The hearing. The things Victoria said. The way Dad looked at me like I was an enemy instead of his daughter. Henry listened, his hands folded on the table. When I finished, he leaned back, sighing. Families can break a person in ways strangers never could. But Alice, you have something stronger than their scorn. You have the truth. Linda wiped her hands on a towel and joined us. And you have us. Do not forget that. Her words nearly undid me. Tears burned behind my eyes, but before I could answer, she disappeared into the bedroom and returned with something folded in her arms. She placed it in front of me, a knitted baby blanket, soft yellow with tiny clouds stitched along the border. I stared at it, stunned. Linda, I whispered, you do not know. Her smile was knowing. I have eyes, Alice, and a mother's instinct. Heat rushed to my face, my hand resting unconsciously on my stomach. I had not said it out loud yet, not even to Daniel, though the secret had been swelling inside me like the quietest miracle. Henry's eyes widened. Is it true? I nodded, barely able to breathe. 12 weeks. Linda clasped her hands together, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, Alice. The room blurred around me as relief flooded through my chest. For weeks I had carried this alone, afraid of how my family would twist it, use it against me. But here in this little kitchen that smelled of yeast and safety, it felt like joy again. Linda reached across the table, squeezing my hand. This child will never doubt they are loved. That is what matters. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A number from Evitech flashed on the screen. My heart lurched as I answered. It was one of Daniel's co-workers, his voice tight. Alice, there has been an accident. A piece of equipment malfunctioned. Daniel hurt his hand. He is in urgent care. The roll fell from my hand. I was already on my feet. Linda grabbed her coat. I will drive. We rushed through icy streets, my heart pounding with every red light. When we arrived, I found Daniel sitting on a plastic chair. His left hand bandaged his face, pale but calm. I dropped to my knees beside him. What happened? He gave me a small smile. Nothing serious, just a nasty gash. Stitches, maybe. The nurse confirmed it, explaining he had avoided worse only by luck. Still seeing his hand wrapped so tightly sent a tremor through me. I took his good hand in mine, my voice low. You scared me. He brushed his thumb over my cheek. I am fine, Alice. We have bigger battles than this. But as the nurse led him back for treatment, I pressed my hand against my stomach again. The battles felt bigger now, heavier, because they were no longer mine alone. Hours later, back at the apartment, Daniel stretched out on the couch with his hand propped on a pillow. Biscuit curled against his legs, protective. I made tea, though my hands shook while pouring it. Daniel watched me, his voice soft. You are quieter than usual. I set the cup down, sat beside him, and finally let the words spill. I am pregnant. His eyes widened, then softened into the kind of smile that lights up a room. He reached for me with his good hand, pulling me close. That is the best news I have ever heard. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to believe it could just be joy, but fear twisted in my chest. They will use it against me, Daniel, my father, Victoria. They will say I am unstable, unfit. He shook his head, his voice firm. No. They can try, but they cannot take this away from us. This is ours, Alice. This is hope. I leaned against him, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat anchoring me. For a moment the weight lifted, but later when the apartment was quiet and Daniel finally drifted into sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The will in the nightstand, the case in the courthouse, the child growing inside me. The stakes had never been higher, and I knew my father would not stop until he destroyed everything I had left. A week later, snow still clung to the streets like salt on glass, the plows pushing piles into frozen walls along the curbs. Daniel's hand was healing, stiff with stitches but usable. I had been driving him to and from Evitech each morning, my own nerves frayed with the weight of everything ahead. That night, we were on our way back from his shift, the sky already dark, the highway slick with ice and slush. Headlights cut across the median, a car angled badly on the shoulder. I slowed, squinting through the flurries. A black Mercedes sat half buried in snow hazard lights, blinking weakly. The hood popped steam rising into the freezing air. Daniel leaned forward. Someone's stuck, pull over. As we rolled closer, my stomach dropped. The figure pacing beside the car, waving his arms in frustration, was unmistakable. Richard Manning, my father, his expensive wool coat dusted with snow, his polished shoes sinking into the slush. For a heartbeat, I thought about driving past. Pretend I had not seen him. Let the cold teach him something. But then Daniel's hand touched my arm. We cannot leave him out here, Alice. I pulled onto the shoulder, the truck tires crunching through ice. My father turned, his face illuminated in our headlights. For once, his expression was stripped of control. His eyes widened, then narrowed, pride slamming back into place. Alice. His voice was sharp, brittle. What are you doing here? I stepped out into the freezing wind, my boots sinking into snow. The cold bit on my cheeks. I kept my voice even. Looks like you are the one who needs help, he bristled. My car stalled. Some issues with the battery system. Brand new state-of-the-art. This should not happen. Daniel joined me, crouching to peer under the hood. Steam-hissed wires exposed a clear electrical short. Daniel shook his head. Fancy tech, but poor maintenance. This thing is fried. My father's jaw tightened. Do not act like you know more than me. Daniel wiped his hands on his jeans. I do know more. And right now you need me if you want to get home tonight. For a long moment, Richard stared at him, the snow swirling between them like a barrier. Then, without another word, he stepped back. Daniel got to work, his movements sure despite the stitches tugging at his skin. I held the flashlight steady, the beam cutting through the dark. My father hovered nearby, muttering curses under his breath fogging in the frigid air. Another pair of headlights appeared behind us, a pickup pulling up. An older man climbed out, wrapped in a heavy coat and a cap pulled low. He walked toward us with a careful gait. Need a hand. His voice was gravelly but kind. When he stepped into the light, I recognized him. Mr. O'Connor, one of my grandfather's old customers. He had been bringing his beat-up Ford to the garage for decades. O'Connor squinted, then smiled faintly. Alice Manning. Haven't seen you in years. My chest tightened. Hi, Mr. O'Connor. His gaze shifted to Daniel, who was bent over the engine. Then he noticed my father, and his expression hardened. Still barking orders, Richard. My father's face darkened. This is none of your business. But O'Connor stayed. He watched Daniel splice wires with steady hands, watched me hand him tools with practiced ease. Finally, the engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared weakly back to life. Daniel closed the hood, wincing as his bandaged hand brushed metal. That should get you home, but you need a full repair. Richard stood stiff, his coat collar pulled tight against the wind. He looked at me, his voice low and begrudging. Thank you. I almost laughed. The words sounded foreign on his tongue. I turned away instead, walking back to the truck. Daniel followed, his breath fogging in the night. O'Connor stopped us before we climbed in. His eyes were steady, his voice quiet enough that my father could not hear. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Alice. Don't let anyone take that place from you. The lump in my throat made it hard to answer. Thank you, I whispered. We drove off the Mercedes, shrinking in the rearview mirror, hazard lights blinking weakly against the dark. I stared out the window, my heart heavy and fierce at once. For the first time, I had seen my father vulnerable, stranded, and powerless. But I had also seen something else. A witness. Daniel glanced at me. What are you thinking? I turned the envelope of the will over in my lap, the edges worn from handling. I am thinking we may have found someone who can stand with us. Daniel nodded slowly. Karma has a way of showing up, doesn't it? Snow swirled around the truck, the highway stretching ahead, and for the first time I felt the fight tilt in my direction. The next court date was set for late February, the cold still biting but the days beginning to stretch longer. I spent the weeks leading up to it digging through boxes of old papers from my grandfather's garage, chasing anything that might strengthen my claim. Daniel helped when his hand allowed, his stitches removed but his skin still tender. At night I lay awake, one hand resting on my belly, the other clutching the will. Every sound outside made me jump, every creak in the building stirring fear that my father was plotting something new. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror, pulling on the only blazer I owned. It was simple navy blue, bought years ago for a job interview I never got. Daniel adjusted the collar for me, his touch steady. You look like you belong in that courtroom, he said softly. When we arrived, the courthouse buzzed with voices and the shuffle of shoes on marble floors. Reporters had shown up, their cameras perched like vultures at the door. My father thrived on the spectacle, striding through the crowd with his lawyer beside him, my mother clutching his arm like a trophy. Victoria trailed behind, her lips painted crimson, her eyes sparkling with mischief. James walked with his hands in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. Inside, the judge called for order. My father's lawyer presented new claims, arguing I lacked the resources to run the garage and suggesting the property should be sold to a developer who had already made an offer. The numbers he read out made the room hum. Millions, enough to tempt anyone. Then Carla stood, her presence calm as ever. She presented not just the will but also testimony. She had reached out to old clients, people who had known my grandfather's intentions. And then she called the first witness, Mr. O'Connor shuffled to the stand, his cap tucked respectfully under his arm. He cleared his throat, his voice rough with age. That garage was more than a building. It was a place Richard's father wanted his granddaughter to have. He told me so himself years before he passed, said Alice was the one who understood what it meant to keep things running, to care about the people more than the money. My father's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the words into record. I watched my father's jaw clench, his knuckles white against the table. For once, his control was cracking under the weight of someone else's truth. As O'Connor stepped down, another surprise came. Linda and Henry entered the courtroom, their hands clasped. Carla called Linda forward. She spoke gently, but her words carried strength. Alice has built her own life, her own family. She is responsible, hard-working, loved. That garage belongs to her not only by law, but by the spirit of the man who left it. I blinked back tears as I listened, my heart swelling. For once, I was not alone against the tide. The judge recessed for lunch, and we stepped outside into the courtyard. Daniel held my hand, his thumb brushing against mine. "You are winning, Alice. I can feel it." But just as I let myself breathe, Victoria appeared. She leaned close, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. "You think you are clever, parading old men and sentimental neighbors. But you will never win against Dad. He has money, and money always wins." I met her gaze, my voice low. "Maybe money wins in your world, but in mine truth does." She smirked and turned away, her heels clicking against the stone. Back inside, the judge called the room to order again. My father himself took the stand. He painted himself as a man trying to preserve the family's dignity, claiming I was reckless, that I had hidden my marriage and was now hiding a pregnancy to manipulate sympathy. The words struck like daggers, whispered gasps filling the benches. Daniel's hand tightened on mine. Carla rose calm but fierce. She dismantled his claims piece by piece, showing records of my steady work, proof of my financial stability and the clear legality of the will. She reminded the court that personal choices about marriage and family are not grounds to erase a lawful inheritance. Then she dropped the final piece. A letter my grandfather had written tucked into the same envelope as the will, addressed simply to me. The judge read it silently, then aloud. His words echoed through the courtroom. He wrote that I had earned the garage with years of dedication, that I had the spirit to carry it forward, that he wanted it in my hands because I saw people not just profit. The room fell silent. My father's face was drained of color. Victoria's smirk faltered. My mother clutched her pearls tighter, as if they were the only thing holding her together. The judge announced he would take time to deliberate before the final ruling, but the air was already heavy with the sense of where it was leaning. We filed out, the crowd buzzing with whispers, reporters scribbling notes. Outside, the cold air hit my lungs sharp and clean. Daniel slipped his arm around me, and for the first time in months, I felt the faintest breath of relief. Still, I knew this was not over, not until the gavel struck one last time. The day of the final ruling felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, the room heavy with silence. Daniel's steady breathing, the only sound beside the faint hum of the heater. I slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen, where the coffee maker clicked on with a comforting gurgle. My hands shook as I poured the first cup, dark liquid steaming against the window's cold glass. I could not taste it. My mind kept circling back to the image of the judge's face, to the gavel that would strike and decide everything. Daniel came in, hair still tousled, his sweatshirt hanging loose. He rubbed my shoulders, kissed the side of my head, and whispered, "You're ready, Alice. You've been ready all along." I wanted to believe him, but my stomach knotted so tight it felt like it might tear in two. We drove in silence to the courthouse. The February air was sharp, biting at our cheeks as we climbed the steps. Reporters swarmed like bees around the door, their cameras flashing, their questions cutting through the morning chill. "Miss Manning, did you really hide your marriage? Is it true? Your father called you unstable? Do you have the means to run the business?" Daniel pressed his arm around me, blocking them off, his jaw tight with anger. I kept my eyes on the heavy wooden doors ahead. Inside, the hum of voices echoed against marble walls. My father was already there, his suit pressed so sharp it looked carved into him, his tie knotted to perfection. He looked every bit the man who believed the world belonged to him. My mother sat close, clutching her pearl necklace as though the tiny beads could shield her from the shame of it all. Victoria sat tall and rigid, her red lipstick bold, her eyes filled with venom. James hovered in the back, trying to disappear into the shadows. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, face stern but unreadable, and we rose as one. My knees wobbled, but I forced myself to stand tall. We sat again, and the judge began to speak. He recounted the evidence, the will, the witnesses, the letter my grandfather had left me. Each word was deliberate, heavy measured. My hands clasped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Daniel slid his hand over mine, steady grounding me in the storm. And then the words I had prayed for came. The court recognizes the will as valid and binding. The garage is the legal property of Alice Manning. The world tilted. My breath hitched. For a second, I thought I might faint, but Daniel's grip held me upright. Tears blurred my vision as the gavel struck, its sharp crack echoing like a final nail in the coffin of my father's control. I glanced across the aisle. My father's face was pale, his lips drawn tight in rage. His lawyer whispered something frantically, but it was useless. The power had slipped from their hands. Victoria looked like someone had slapped her, her mouth opening and closing without sound. My mother's face crumpled, her pearls trembling against her chest as her fingers shook. James lowered his head, his eyes fixed on the floor. The judge dismissed the court, and the room erupted in noise. Reporters shuffled, voices buzzed, cameras flashed again. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat and the sound of Daniel whispering, "You did it, Alice. You finally did it." We walked out into the sunlight, the chill hitting my lungs sharp and clean. Reporters surged forward, but Daniel shielded me again, pushing through until we reached the truck. The door slammed shut, cutting off the chaos, leaving only the muffled beat of my pulse. I leaned against the cool window, tears spilling down my cheeks, my breath coming in uneven bursts. "It's over," I whispered. "It's finally over." Daniel pulled me into his arms, his voice rough with emotion. "No, Alice. It's just beginning." That evening we drove to the garage. The old brick walls stood tall against the fading sky, weathered but unbroken, just like me. I stepped out, gravel crunching beneath my boots, and placed my hand against the heavy door. For a moment, I swear I felt my grandfather's presence steadying me, reminding me why I fought. Inside, the air smelled of oil and time, dust and memory clinging to the beams. Tools still hung where he had left them, ghostly echoes of his careful touch. I walked to the center of the floor, my eyes sweeping the shadows, and felt the future open before me. Daniel joined me, wrapping his arm around my waist. "This place is ours now," he said softly. "We'll make it shine again." I closed my eyes and I could see it, the bays filled with light, engines humming, laughter bouncing off the walls, apprentices learning skills that meant independence. A place where hard work was honored, where dignity was not a luxury but a given. We sat on the workbench as the sun dipped low, light streaming golden through the dusty windows. I laid my hand on my belly, whispering a promise to the child growing inside me. "You will never wonder if you're enough. You will never doubt you're wanted." For the first time, my father's voice no longer echoed in my head. His judgment, his mockery. His control had been silenced with one strike of the gavel. His power was gone, broken, like the photo frame that had shattered that night at Christmas dinner. What remained was mine to build. Now I want to ask you, if you had been in my place, would you have fought against your own blood to protect what was rightfully yours, even if it meant tearing open every old wound? Or would you have let it go to keep peace that was never really peace? Tell me what you think. I want to hear your stories. If you believe in standing tall for what's right, share your thoughts. Leave a comment like this story, and subscribe so we can keep building this community together.